Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Dirt Podcast. I'm your host, Grant Ervin from S&B USA, coming to you from Seneca Valley School District in Cranberry, Pennsylvania. And today I have with me Dr. Tracy Vitale, Superintendent of Seneca Valley School District. Tracy, how are you today?
I'm doing well, thank you. And thank you for doing this. We're so glad to host you here today.
We're super excited. You know, a lot of our listeners have written to the folks at Pittsburgh Earth Day and asked us about what's going on in schools across the Pittsburgh region with regards to sustainability. And our friend and my colleague gave us this insight with regards to what's happening up at Seneca Valley in terms of sustainability and all the great work that you're doing. And Katie Spear, who's our Director of Marketing, she was like, you need to talk to Tracy. Should be a great episode for the Dirt Podcast and be able to highlight what's going on here at Seneca Valley. And I have to tell you, walking in today, I was absolutely blown away in terms of not just how beautiful this school is, but also how functional it is. And so we're super excited to get into all the different aspects of sustainability because there's a real movement happening in school districts around the country in terms of the facilities and integrating education about the environment and the world of sustainability. So we're really excited to dive into that today with you.
Great.
Maybe let's get started and, first of all, talk a little bit about yourself and your journey, both as a superintendent, but also what kind of has given you some passion with regards to sustainability aspects of the school?
Thank you. First of all, I grew up in Indiana County in western Pennsylvania in a very rural area. And so I think that first influences how I lead a school. Okay. My parents were blue-collar workers, had a garden. I didn't realize that you could buy so many different vegetables from a store that we were already growing. I mean, to the point we were not farmers, but my father was a Marine, so he really believed in this. Maybe he didn't call it sustainability, but he believed in this whole notion of providing for our family the best we could, which even at one point I remember we had a pig, which, is later we ate, but
did the pig have a name?
Yeah, no, I don't remember. It may have, but I remember, feeding that and thinking like, this was kind of our pet, and then it was just natural that we ate that later as a family. And so I just think growing up with rural roots, and all of my friends, a lot of them were farmers and cattle farmers and farmed the land. And I think that has just kind of always been in my blood to be able to grow the food that we eat and partake in really fresh vegetables is a lot of fun as a kid. Now, weeding a very large garden as a kid was never fun. When our parents went to work, my brother and I, we still laugh about how difficult that was to, why did Dad have to make such a big garden? But nevertheless, I grew up loving vegetables like broccoli and Brussels sprouts and green beans and all the things that kids may not like. I think I got an early taste for that.
Literally and figuratively.
Yeah, that's right. So certainly I don't have a garden today, but I'm very much into for kind of relaxation and de-stressing, planting flowers, planting bulbs, and kind of getting in the dirt myself. So I think when you do that, that already influences you as an educator and as an educational leader. So when we talk about sustainability, sometimes it takes like a political route. I try not to go there.
Right.
I try not to look at the political side of this. I try to look at this from the perspective of what does it mean to prepare children to be good citizens and to take care of the place where we live so that we can pass this beautiful land, especially in western Pennsylvania, on to the next generation.
So from a gardening perspective, maybe use a gardening analogy. It's really about getting some dirt underneath your fingernails in terms of the learning aspect that goes alongside of sustainability.
Absolutely. And then learning even beyond, planting or how do we grow crops for us. Teaching there are many children that don't know or understand about farming, especially in a lot of our suburban schools or urban schools. Sure. And so Seneca Valley is very fortunate. We still have we are 100 square miles. And across those miles, we still have working farms. And trying to make sure children understand that's where food comes from, not the store, right? The store just delivers it. So, how can we go about growing some of these vegetables and fruits that we love, that we get from the store? What can we do? And things like, can a lemon tree be grown in your home, and studying that?
Right.
Or can we grow any of these vegetables in schools, which we are doing, and I'll talk more about. And then can we serve those in our cafeteria?
Fascinating. So your journey started in Indiana County. What was next?
Well, from there, I looked at one college, back in the 80s and 90s. I think a lot of us did that. And I went to that college, Duquesne University.
Okay.
And I was very
The
Bluff. I was on the Bluff. A lot of fun. Loved Duquesne. And
Go Dukes.
Right. Absolutely. Go Dukes. And there, I was very interested in law and political science, and I thought maybe I wanted to go to law school, but I wasn't sure. What I knew, growing up in a rural area, I went to Purchase Line High School, and I had really fabulous English language arts teachers. And so I had a real passion for reading and writing, and so I thought that might be the avenue. But as I went through my classes, I determined that I wanted to be like those English teachers that I had. So I majored in secondary education English.
Okay.
And from there, I later then went to Carlow College for a master's I got a gifted education certificate, and I got a master's in educational leadership. I never wanted to be a school leader, ever. And here I am at the top seat. That's another story. So I think that's an example of, walk through the doors that you're passionate about.
Yeah.
And then work doesn't really feel like work on most days. Now, it depends on the day.
Sure.
But on most days, I feel really good about the work I'm doing. I feel that it's purpose-driven and that it's something I was meant to do. After Carlow, I went to the University of Pittsburgh, and that's where I received my superintendent's papers and my doctorate in education. And there I specialized in human resources. How do we get the best teachers to the interview table? And then how do we hire the best and retain the best?
Interesting.
And so that's my educational walk.
Was there a person along the way, a mentor or a teacher, that you really found as somebody that kind of guided you through that process or inspired you to be kind of in the education space?
I think all of the
or a
teachers,
cluster of them,
yes,
not
all
just
of the
one?
teachers I've had. I mentioned the high school English teachers I had. They were amazing. They taught me the process of writing, which is still a struggle today to teach people how to write and write well,
For sure.
which is one of the number one critical thinking skills we can teach. But I had leaders along the way that would pull me aside and have these moments of, I think you're good at this. You should think about being a principal. Me? No way.
Right.
And then leaders who would say, I think you're good at this. You should think about being a superintendent. I said, no, I'm a teacher. And so, I
Because it's
just
interesting.
walked.
There's two different skill
Right.
sets, right?
Not really.
No?
Not really.
Okay.
Because by way of example, last night I was at.
Because you're managing a classroom, you're
Right.
managing an organization.
But you're always teaching.
Right.
If you're in the field of education, you are always a teacher. And while I am not in a classroom every day with little ones, I am in many adult classrooms. Like today, I would consider our discussion about teaching and learning. And last night I was at Sherwood Oaks in Cranberry Township. And that's an independent living facility, and talking to our senior citizens about what do schools look like today? Why build a new school?
Oh, interesting.
What are some of the concepts? And they wanted to know how we're teaching children to be good critical thinkers. And so
the seniors were
They
were
did.
interested in that process.
yes, they did. And so it was supposed to be 1 hour. I think we went a little over. I had dinner with them.
They kept
and
you out late.
They did. They kept me out very late. They are the most relaxed people I've met in a while.
There's students that don't have a bedtime.
That's
so-
right. That's right. And so I think about what I did last night. And I was there with our school board president, and that's teaching and learning.
Right.
And so I think everything I've done in my life has been because I had these wonderful teachers growing up in a small rural environment who inspired me and motivated me. And I just kept walking through these doors of where it felt good to be.
That's interesting. You started to get into this a little bit. Talk about Seneca Valley as a district, if you can help paint the picture, because it is a dynamic district, both in terms of obviously the students and the people and the activities, but also the growth of Cranberry. And I think about you mentioned there's still farms in Cranberry. When I was growing up, it was a rural place. Now it's much more developed. Talk about the district and some of the different characterizations that go alongside of that.
Sure. We have a number of municipalities, boroughs, townships. Cranberry Township is where about 70% of our student population comes from. So you can see just from that statistic, that is where we're more concentrated with students, which is why we placed the new building very close to Cranberry Township. We have 2 more elementary schools in Cranberry Township, Rowan and Hain.
Okay.
We also are experiencing, and people think that Cranberry Township is built out. They are still building in Cranberry Township. Now there's less room, but the township is very good about long-term strategic planning and what that looks like for the community.
Some really great municipal leaders in Cranberry.
Absolutely, and we work very closely with them. And they give us a heads up when a developer is looking at a new piece of land and what they might do there and how many children it could possibly bring. And all
That's
of our
rare, by the way.
Right.
Having worked around this state, that's like heaven sent.
Yes, yes.
That you have that type of cooperation.
Yes. Well, I think, one of our former township leaders there, Jerry Andre, he was a manager in Cranberry Township and has retired. A mentor of yours, that's wonderful. And so Jerry would say, Tracy, schools need good communities and good communities need good schools. And I've never forgotten that. And there have been so many wonderful leaders at Cranberry Township and really all of our townships. Don Pepe just retired from our Zelienople borough manager position. He was a wonderful mentor, always working with the school district to let us know when developments were coming in, when companies are looking to move into the district, and that helps us to plan. So I think all of us working together collaboratively make this 100 square miles of suburban mixed development and some of our more rural areas that also still exist in the north a much better place to live and play and go to school, and just working together really benefits our children because I see what's coming down the pike sometimes before everyone else, and then I can begin that planning with our school board.
To have the ability to look around the corner and see what's coming up next.
Absolutely.
That's a good piece to kind of transition into. When we first met, when Katie brought us together, one of the conversations we were having was like, what led you to Ehrman School in terms of the development of this complex that we're in that listeners and viewers are going to get a chance to see. You had some formative travel experiences, right, that helped you kind of look around the corner and see what's coming next in education. Maybe could you dive into that a little bit?
Sure. In 2017, I won a scholarship with other school leaders to travel to Finland and Estonia to study their schools. And as many probably already know, Finland is very well known for their school systems.
It's one of the top educated countries in the OECD.
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely. And so, to travel there with other school superintendents, there were about 60 of us, and to have a leader in that group who was a teacher in Finland and leading our group and showing us the buildings and the schools and what they look like, but more importantly, to talk to us and show us the teaching techniques they're using. How is that different or how is it the same? And when I read articles about other countries, I'm always a bit skeptical.
They're number one in the happiness index. They're top tier in education. What's going on in Finland?
Exactly. So I wanted to see it for myself, and that is part of the, I guess, being raised by a Marine. I'm always skeptical. Let me check this out. Let me go see it.
Yeah, you got to get a feel, a view of the battlefield, right?
Yeah. So I was very influenced there, just taken aback. I think we're there 8 or 9 days. And visited both countries, and mainly the schools we visited in Finland. What I was most taken aback by was how every building there that I visited, the Finns were trying to bring the outside in. So what I mean by that was there were a lot of sight lines in the buildings where no matter where I sat, I could see outside. And when I asked them those questions, they were they didn't seem to do this deliberately. It was just something that was part of their culture, that they often put a lot of windows in, especially because of the transition, more hours of daylight versus a lot of hours of no daylight in the winter.
So they're optimizing natural light in the schools just to get that
Right.
that vitamin D, if you will,
Yes.
In terms of that experience.
And when I ask about it, they said, during the winter months when there's very few hours of sunlight. Now, I was there in the summer months, so there were very
Tons
few
of sunlight.
hours of dark.
Right.
So I learned a lot about darkening the room and paying attention to the watch, because we could still be out visiting or talking at 1 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
1 o'clock, no,
Yeah.
1 o'clock in
That's
the
further
morning.
north.
Yeah. So, it was interesting to see their attitude and their culture about how to educate their children.
Right.
About the outdoors, about the environment, spending a lot of time in the environment when they had the daylight hours especially. And they introduced me to the sauna, which is the sauna,
Yeah.
right? And how they would get in these, and everyone did this. This was a family thing. This was in the
part
middle
of
of the day, yes, in the middle of the day, business leaders would take sauna breaks.
Right.
And so I thought, well, this is interesting, and we did it with them. And in the middle of the day, you might have a small snack. We were in Helsinki, and then you would go to sauna. You would take sauna, is what they called it, and you would
Just
go
as
in
part of the day.
Yes, and you would go to the sauna, and then you would jump in the Baltic Sea. And this was very typical for them.
Right.
But again, getting in the outdoors,
Yep.
revitalizing your body. Talk about a mental health break.
Right.
I'm still looking for sauna around here.
Did you guys put one of them in the school?
No, we did not. We did not. Yeah, that was something we didn't discuss
Got
because it's
value
not
engineered out.
right. It's not part of the culture in the United States. But all of those experiences in visiting the schools there and visiting at the time, we didn't know we would be building a brand new building in
Right.
2017. We had begun talking about.
This is 06 or 08?
When you were in Finland?
Yes,
Okay.
I'm sorry. That was 2007 when I was in
2007.
Finland.
Okay.
So in 2007, I apologize, I didn't realize we would be building a new building. But
Right.
at looking back now, I realize it was influencing my thinking
Yeah.
about schools. And so just what they do for recycling. The host was a teacher in Finland, and he had us to his home for dinner.
Okay.
And going to look where the garbage was, it was so minimal. I mean, even down to the strawberries that we were eating, like, the summer sun, those long hours.
Right.
They're known for their strawberries because of the amount, and their produce gets a lot of sunlight. So they have these amazing, they call them, midnight strawberries because of the sun that's hitting them but nothing was wasted, and everything was recycled, and that was very new for me.
Right.
And I also visited Germany prior to Finland, and that was a family visit with family that we had there on a military base.
Okay.
And I saw the recycling that occurred in Germany and France. And so that was all hitting my thinking as we did start to design this building.
Right. And with that experience, I mean, how formative was that for you? Just in terms of, do you still continue connections with people that you traveled with, and with whether it's other educators or folks here in the United States? What's that been like, just thinking back now?
Yes, we still stay connected with the teacher that led us on the trip. As a matter of fact, he's been to this new building in person twice.
Wow.
And he, in the fall, did some virtual training sessions with our teachers, the teachers here that wanted to be part of learning more about phenomenon-based learning, which is something they do in Finland. So we've stayed connected to him. He has been just a wonderful resource. But also, some of the elements you will see in this new building when we take a tour, there is a circular ramp as you walk into the lobby that takes you to our kindergarten wing and our primary grades. That ramp is inspired by two places. One, the Helsinki Library, but also the Carnegie Science Center, where you have the circular ramp.
Oh, yeah.
And so the ramp here in this building is designed to get kids and adults moving more, because I can get up the steps pretty quickly in a short amount of time, but it takes me time to walk through the ramp. And as I'm walking through the ramp, I'm seeing the building, I'm seeing surroundings. We are encouraging exercise, but it's also a learning space.
Right.
So under the ramp, there's a nook for reading. We've had musical performances on the bottom floor of this ramp. And so it's very whimsical looking, but it's also very much and kind of open environment, open space, that as you're walking, you can also keep looking outside at the surroundings that this building is placed on here in Western Pennsylvania.
You know, it makes me think of just so many things. One, the importance of design and how design has to be integrated and thoughtful. The other is this topic of experiential learning. I mean, we started the conversation, you're talking about working in the garden, right? Or, you know, travel experiences. And, you know, we just had a group of executives from S&B USA, our company, travel to Israel to look at different projects that we're building in Israel. And they all came back gushing about this project or that project or how we did this, and just seeing different perspectives. Right? I think also about you know, my time with the city of Pittsburgh, I had the ability to, same thing as you, is like travel to other cities and, you know, talk about city stuff and water and transportation. And you find that everybody has the same language. You know, educators share, no matter where you're from and what your physical language is, you share the language of education. What does that mean for kids and students and parents too, I think, to encourage those types of experiential learning opportunities, whether it's in a building like this or through curriculum? I mean, what are some things that you guys are working on in that area?
We believe we learn best through experience, not through being talked at.
Right.
And so I think that's where schools have changed the most. And so getting children to use their hands and experience the learning is very important to us in all of our buildings. So looking at things like phenomenon-based learning, problem-based learning, how can we get children to struggle with a problem, right? Because we also learn through failure, which no one likes to experience, but the reality is those are some of our best learning experiences.
Learning from our mistakes.
Absolutely, all of us. But I think sometimes, and I'm just as guilty as a parent, we don't want to see our children struggle, right? We want to protect them. And sometimes we do that as teachers too. So we want to help our children not struggle as much, but the reality is, and I don't mean failure in that I take your English paper and I mark it all up with red, but I don't really give you constructive feedback, right? I'm not talking about that kind of failure.
I have
where
a couple
the child,
of those tables that are like marked with tears and red ink and it smears.
Right, I'm not talking about that kind of failure where I get to tell you everything you did wrong.
Right.
Instead, I'm talking about this experience of struggling through a problem or struggling through how my brother and I were having to get all the weeds out of that garden before my father got home from work. How were we going to work together to get this done? And siblings don't always work together well. And so how do we bring that kind of experience into schools? And we do that. Number one, our teachers travel as well. I'm, as a matter of fact, going this summer to Poland with Classrooms Without Borders and taking 5 teachers.
Oh, that's so awesome.
And so we will learn about the Holocaust on the ground, feet on the ground in some of these really horrible places, right?
Sure, yeah.
And so that's how we learn. I can learn about the Holocaust from reading, I have.
But when you're there, it's totally impactful. Like I had this is a bit of an aside, but I had the opportunity to go to Dachau. Outside of Munich in Germany, and you get a different perspective when you're on the ground, right? But then how do you translate that?
Well, first you have to make sure that, I believe, you provide opportunities for your teachers to learn and grow and stay passionate and excited about what they do. Because COVID really took a toll on everyone. And we are definitely seeing high burnout rates. We saw a lot of adults leave the profession, and we have less and less college students majoring in education. So this staff shortage, teacher shortage, is very real in the state of Pennsylvania and across our nation. So how can we get our teachers to be involved, just like we did with the teacher from Finland, and be passionate about what's going on elsewhere? Like, it's almost like you're offering hope. Like, we're coming through this with hope that education will bounce back even better and even stronger because of what we've learned from COVID.
So it's the resilience factor, right? Like the idea that you're not just bouncing back, but you're bouncing forward because you're a result of learning those lessons and then thinking about how do you apply them into the classroom or into a physical space.
Absolutely. And so I think you have to start with the adults because they are the ones on the front line, not me.
Right.
I mean, I can walk through buildings, I can talk to children, but the biggest impact is through our teachers, our paraprofessionals who are teacher aides in the classroom, working directly with our children, our security guards, our police, our front office staff. What we learned through COVID, and we're reminded that every job matters in a school and in our nation. The essential workers, they were here,
Right.
and others were at home.
For sure.
Our cafeteria workers, our bus drivers. So how can we inspire them and make sure they're feeling that the saw is sharpened, Because if we do that, they inspire children.
So, go back, you have this formative experiential learning experience yourself, in Finland and in Germany. Take me up through that process of, now that's in the back of your head, and then all of a sudden you're like, we're growing. Jerry Andre comes to you and says, Tracy, I got a couple more developments coming. They're on the way. We need to get ready. What's that next phase as you start to think about I'm going to call it campus planning or district scale planning? Sure. What's the next piece of that journey for you?
Well, I never, ever wanted to do construction, I can tell you that. And I never, ever wanted to lead a construction project. Now, thankfully, I don't have to, right? The district has a lot of expert consultants. Mm-hmm. So we have a director of buildings and grounds. We have a construction company that manages a lot of the projects. We have amazing architects, amazing civil engineers, and all of those experts at the table help us to do this. I don't do it alone. So when I'm told, well, we're growing and we need to, as soon as we open this new Ehrman Crest, we need to then loop back and renovate our intermediate high school. And then we need to look at renovations and additions on our elementaries.
What's the total footprint? Give me a picture, listeners, a picture of the total footprint in terms of number of facilities.
Sure. We have 7,400 students. The demographers are predicting that we will pass 8,000 students in the next 5 years. Again, that's
K through 12.
That's K through 12.
Okay.
Currently, we have a half-day kindergarten program. We'd like to expand that to full day, but we need the facilities to do that. We thought that we might get that here in this building, but we didn't have the capacity to open full-day kindergarten this year in all of our buildings, but we are aiming for that. And we have 9 buildings. And we have, we cover 100 square miles with the students that we service in our public school system. So it's quite large. It's one of the larger districts, certainly in Western Pennsylvania and in the Commonwealth. It's in the top third of the largest districts.
Wow.
So it is a big place. So my challenge is, when I hear we're growing more, and I need to plan for that, is to try to stay ahead of that with our leaders in our communities, our planning leaders, and get ready. Because I don't want to be in a position, because children don't tell us, their parents don't tell us they're coming until they show up, right? Because they may be moving with corporate America. Now, we are seeing less movement because of COVID and more people teleworking. But we are finding that some people are moving here, even if their location of work is not Pittsburgh, because they find the Pittsburgh suburbs to be very desirable.
It's a location
with our
of choice.
Schools.
Yeah.
Yes. And so
you're seeing folks coming from other major markets
yes.
to a place like Cranberry because it's a great place to live, because there's a solid school district,
right.
Because there's all the amenities that we have here in southwestern Pennsylvania. That's like a dot on their map. They're like,
right.
let's go there.
Right. And they may have originally been from here, and now they can telework, so they may move back home.
To be closer to friends and family.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Wow.
So that kind of planning can be overwhelming, but in the same token, I see it as teaching. I see, I don't want to be involved in construction, but I have to be. And when I do, I'm glad that I have the experts at the table to teach me, that I learn from them, and hopefully they learn from me. And what I mean by that is, recently when we were opening this building in August, they came to me and they said, it's been fabulous. We are going to open on time, which was a big goal of mine. And we are going to open with everything fully functional except the playgrounds.
Oh.
They said to me, the experts said, but that's okay, we can get those done later. I said, no, that is an outdoor classroom for children. We need
you wouldn't
to have
leave a classroom interior finished,
right.
so why would you? Yeah.
And that's where the teaching and learning comes in, because the folks at the table were seeing it as, but everything is ready on the inside. And I really pressed, and our director of buildings and grounds pressed our construction crews to get those playgrounds. They weren't done on the first day, but certainly opened on the first week. But they were estimating they could be delayed by several months. And I said, the playgrounds are just as important to me and the educators as every room in this building. And so that's where the teaching, and they didn't realize that. They thought the playgrounds were just extra,
They're
nice to have.
superfluous extras, nice to have, yeah.
And they're not. I mean, we purposely chose the kinds of structures we have on these playgrounds. Again, first inspired by the playgrounds at the Helsinki Library and what we saw in Finland, but also in building kind of an outdoor classroom. You know, we want kids to be outside as much as possible. They are little. Developmentally, they need to be outside. And I would argue our middle school and high schoolers need to be outside even more.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, just to blow off some steam and from a mental health and wellness standpoint. And again, to connect with the outside, right? Like we spend so much of our time indoors, which shapes our mental health and our physical health and our overall well-being. But the ability to get outside, like, is so rejuvenating, right? And to do that in the middle part of your day just sparks you and gives you a burst of energy.
Like the Finns.
Yeah,
and
like
the
the
sauna.
Finns, yeah.
We don't have sauna, but we have playgrounds.
And we can put that in the budget, I think, for 2024, 2025.
Yeah, I'll let you talk to our school board about that.
I will give an impassioned speech.
Okay.
No, but seriously, like that process, though, because just what you're talking about, that what you have here is something different. And so how did you go through that process in terms of, wow, you don't have a sauna, but like the playground experience, the design experience. How do you educate the school board and parents and teachers and students too that this school is going to be something special? Like, what's that process?
Well, first of all, it starts with relationships, and that's part of the teaching experience, right? And I relate everything we've done here to teaching and learning. And so we started off with this broad view that while we could just build a square building with square classrooms, we know how to build schools. We wanted this school to be not an institution, but we wanted the building itself to be a learning tool. Everything about it. So, I'm also very inspired. I love museums, and I'm very inspired by all of the museums I've been in. So how can we make school like the museum experience, more of that experience learning? And so we started off with that view of everything in this building needs to be a learning tool. From the moment you walk from the parking lot to the curb or from the bus area to the cafeteria in the morning, every moment we need to have learning moments at every wall. And so as soon as you walk into the building, we have these beautiful canopy columns that are kind of whimsical. And people don't realize it unless either one is pointed out or they're curious, because there are labels on all those canopy columns, and they're not all placed straight vertical up and down. They have angles, which is a lesson in and of itself if you take the time to kind of look at what's going on there. And we have measurements, weight measurements. We have pounds on one side and kips on the other side. Okay. So right there, most people, I didn't know what a kip was. And during the construction process and during the design process, I learned about a kip. So the architect said to us, we can put kips labels, which is unit of force. And so architects know very well it. Okay. They are units of force, a measurement of units of force. And so those two measurements on these poles, we can take children out there and say, do you notice anything? Like in a children's museum. Do you notice anything? What are those labels? What do you think those mean? Let's go look those up. Let's be curious about this. Why is this pole straight? Why is this one angled? Which one can hold more weight? We can do a math lesson. We can do a science lesson. Instead of standing in front of children and say, today we're going to learn about angles. Right. We can go out and say, let's start at the canopy columns.
Oh, interesting.
Under this canopy, in the evening or when it starts to get dark, the lights come on. How are these lights powered? Do you notice anything about the lights? They're kind of in random places. Well, we purposely designed the lights, and I was inspired by the library in Helsinki, the way they placed their lighting, and how they used astronomy to place it. Right. Yeah. So here, The children don't know this because we use this as a curious moment, and we allow teachers to explore that area as questions and curiosity. But the lights we shared with the architects what idea we had and what we had seen, and they said, why don't we, because I was thinking about star constellations. We could teach about the stars from those lights. Okay. But how could we kind of memorialize this building, the year and the month we opened it? So the architects said, let's replicate the night sky and the position of the stars in the month that you believe you will open.
Oh,
so
that's amazing.
That's how those lights are positioned. So the kids can go out and look for the Big Dipper, and the kids can go out and they can study that. That costs no money to do.
Right.
Just it's how we placed it and making sure that in the construction phase that idea continues through and that it's on the blueprints. But those are the types of things that we tried to do with kind of learning from the curb before you even walk into the building. What can this building teach us?
Right. Oh, that's fascinating. And so using the building as a learning environment was also part of like the development process with the board, with the residents, effectively, to say this Ehrman School is gonna be something different.
Yes.
That's so amazing. Let's talk about the building, some of the specifics. You've been acknowledged, by industry leaders for the design. What do you find? I mean, you've given some things here, but like, what's special here for you? In terms of not just the accolades and but when you walk in the building, you're like, yeah, like.
Well, definitely the ramp. There's a steel beam that we left. It was the last beam to be placed in the building, and we left that exposed. And for me, that's part of Pittsburgh history. And so that's one of my favorite parts as I walk in, and you may get a chance to see that today. And that last beam before it's placed, it is Pittsburgh steelworker tradition, iron worker tradition, that when that last beam is placed, all the workers sign that beam.
Yeah.
And usually that last beam is covered up in a lot of our Pittsburgh buildings. As a matter of fact, Ann Fullenkamp, who is an architect at the Children's Museum, she helped design a lot of this building, and it really influenced our thinking. But she says when they go into buildings and renovate old buildings, they will often find these beams behind walls. So we said, we're going to do this and we're not going to cover the beam.
So you left it exposed.
Yes, so you'll see that, and that's like one of my favorite parts because I was taught about that Pittsburgh tradition from an apprentice who is an iron worker downtown.
So you're acknowledging labor and the labor tradition in Pittsburgh,
Right.
and it's integrated in one of the most sustainable schools in the region.
Yes.
That's a fascinating connection.
And that is called a topping off ceremony. And so if you look that up, there's a lot of tradition in Pittsburgh with the iron workers and why they do that.
Yep.
So we could teach the children all about just that beam and Pittsburgh history. I love that part. I love history. That may be why.
Yeah.
And there's also an old safe, an old combination safe. It's giant from the old school that we brought to this school, another piece of history. And it still works, and people here know how to work it, and we can show the children.
Right.
But it's really interesting to research that safe and how old we think it might be based on the fact that the word Pittsburgh, it was a manufacturer in Pittsburgh, did not have an H at the end. So you can look up what was the time period, I won't give it away, what was the time period that Pittsburgh did not have an H? More history. I love that.
Yeah.
And then I love the energy dashboard because it's linked to our solar panels, another outdoor classroom. It's linked to the rain chains here in the front of the building, another learning moment. How does rain flow? How much water can we collect? What should we do in regards to sustainability efforts and water and rain? I love the energy dashboard if you get to see that. That's a lot of fun.
Let's dive into that. Some of the sustainability highlights. We talked a little bit about the energy dashboard here, geothermal, solar. What are some of the different building sustainability techniques that have been built in to the facility?
Thank you. Yes. We have a small bank of geothermal. And again, after visiting Finland and places like that, Germany, I wanted to do a large amount of geothermal. I was hoping to heat and cool the entire building on geothermal. But the reality is, at the time when we were designing, there weren't many rebates, there weren't many incentives, and especially in Western Pennsylvania, where you have less sunlight than maybe other parts of the country, it was not feasible to spend that amount of money up front to try to regain it later.
Right.
Now, planning a building now might be different because of the amount of federal rebates and the amount, how that technology has developed. But we do have a small bank of geothermal, and it heats and cools one demonstration classroom.
Okay.
So children can study that notion of what is geothermal, how does it work, and compare it to the traditional HVAC systems, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, and how we use other types of energy in the building. And what...
Again, a learning experience.
Right. And I was hoping to have more solar panels, but again, this is all fairly new for Western Pennsylvania. Right. And so what we did was we designed so we could have a bank of solar panels that are fully functional, that offsets the grid and puts a little bit of energy back into our building. And the main thing I wanted was that we would have these outdoor demonstration classrooms, the experience learning with geothermal, with we have a visible mechanical closet here where kids can look in and see a traditional HVAC system, just like the Children's Museum. So all of these experiences of how does this building work? What can it teach us? How was it built? We left part of the wall exposed to show children what is behind the wall. The studs, the electrical system, what all goes into building a building. Again, all those ideas, we were definitely influenced by the Children's Museum. But all of that comes together on the energy dashboard, which is in the front of our Cirque Center. So I hope you get to see that.
Awesome. So it's become an integrated learning tool for you. When we walked in, I was like, oh, it has the brand new school smell, What are you looking to transition, I think, both for some of your other existing facilities? Like, are you taking lessons from Ehrman into some of your pre-existing facilities? And then also, what's next on the horizon?
First, because as we were designing and building this building, we wanted to make sure we had equitable resources in every building. So the first thing we did many years ago was put a Cirque Center in every one of our libraries. So turned our libraries into, yes, we have a repository of books, but also how can these be maker centers? How can the library be a place where kids create, innovate, research? So all of that has occurred in all of our elementary buildings. So that was a step we took. And then our secondary libraries also kind of remade themselves into what students told us they wanted. And so that was done in all of the buildings before this building was built. And so placing things, you don't have to have a brand new building to place things like rain chains.
For sure.
To put it's better if you do the geothermal while you're building, but solar panels, right?
Yeah.
You can put a bank of solar panels.
A lot of things can be additive
right.
for existing facilities.
And so what we've learned since we've opened this building is how will teachers and students interact with the building? That's what we're reflecting on and learning now. How can we do things in a more sustainable way? How can we do things in a more fiscally prudent way and get even better results? What is that return on investment? What does it look like?
Because it's all integrated, right? I mean,
Yes.
when we start, I was saying the other day, cost equals carbon, or carbon equals costs. When you're looking at like emissions reductions and, what for a lot of people is kind of an esoteric discussion, how do you reduce your carbon footprint? Well, it's also about how do you reduce costs. For a school, you're making investments that are going to last generations plus. And so that means a lot, not just for now, but for posterity, right? I mean, one of the things, maybe just to kind of bring our conversation to a close, we've touched on a lot in different spaces, but what does, and I can totally see why this is one of the 2022 most innovative places in Pittsburgh. But what does this mean for health and wellness? As an administrator, but also for the teachers and the students and the people that are the consumers of the building. Like, what does it mean for them, particularly given the challenges that we've faced over the last several years?
Well, a direct design strategy we use that people may not realize is there are a lot of curves in the building, just like in nature. And that whole notion of curves versus hard corners, hard squares is relaxing. People don't even realize some of that design in the background, and we're glad. We don't want them to realize it. And so people will tell us as they walk in the building, I just feel so relaxed and calm when I'm there.
Yeah.
And I think those design features really help in the background.
Wow.
But also that you can look outside from every classroom, from every common space, everywhere, the conference rooms, everywhere. You can feel like you're outside, even though you're inside. I think that makes a huge impact. I grew up in the country. I was always looking at the outside. For children to sit in their classroom or to sit in a collaborative space and see animals here in Western Pennsylvania roaming the property, for us to have put the building in a place where we tried not to disturb a lot of the soil. We only moved what we had to move. And so those contours of the rolling hills here in Western Pennsylvania are still, we didn't flatten this spot.
You're part of it.
We're part of it. We're integrated. We worked with a lot of civil engineers to get that design to be, that we're kind of part of the nature instead of being, isolated from it or separate from it. And I love that. I think all of our buildings will be more focused in the future. And I hope all schools will be more focused on bringing the outside in.
Yeah.
And how can the building be part of the education instead of just a repository for learning?
You know, Tracy, we've talked a lot about experiential learning, and we've talked about your gardening experience in Indiana County. We've talked about your travel experience to schools in Finland and in Germany, and this idea of bringing the outside in, but also taking the students from the inside out. And the utilization of space here at Ehrman is also something special. The roof. Talk to me a little bit about the roof and how you've used the roof for all kinds of different demonstrations, but also functional aspects for the school itself.
Yes. So again, being influenced by some of my travel and talking to teachers about what they want and talking to several stakeholders, and then going back to our architects and saying, we want to use space in a better way, because so many rooftops for schools and even commercial settings aren't utilized at all. They're dead zones. So we felt like here that number one, if we have a lot of sight lines where children can see these rooftops, but also how can we use the rooftops? Is there a way to use them as a learning space? So we've done that in the kindergarten wing. There is a kindergarten terrace, and the teachers decided that they would use planter boxes, and their kindergarten children can go out there and plant seeds here in the spring.
So they could go play on the roof.
They can play on the roof, and it's very safe. We were, nervous at first,
Right.
but, with the right design, they can get outside in a very safe spot without ever going out the front doors, right from their classroom. The other thing where the solar panels are, we wanted that to be an outdoor classroom, and so we also did a rooftop garden there and pre-planted some sedum there that will grow every year so children can study, well, why is this coming back in the spring? How does this come back annually? What is it? And are there other plants we want to put out here and to take care of? So almost like students and teachers curating these outdoor spaces that they have access to.
That's amazing. Just thinking about different tools then too, like you've had hydroponics, right?
Yes,
Is
thank
that
you.
another
Yes.
piece? So like, again, bringing gardening and sustainable gardening practices into the school?
Yes, so the hydroponics that is certainly becoming a bigger business in Pittsburgh and in the region and across our nation, and it has been for a while. But I was inspired by the environmental science building at Allegheny College while doing a college tour. And they have a beautiful hydroponic demonstration in the front of the building. And so seeing that, I went to the principals and I said, you've got to get up there.
You got to go to meet
I
them.
want this. I want this in the lobby.
Right.
What do you think? And they came back and they said, we've worked with the scientists there and we think we have something better. So we have mobile hydroponic labs where and they close up and they're very beautiful and contained with the water, and kids are planting things there. I can't wait to see how the basil will turn out.
Okay.
One of my favorite
Pesto
plants.
in the future.
Right. And as we know, pesto can be very expensive. So
Right.
again, showing children traditional farming with soil, but also here's how there's so much behind how hydroponics works, right?
It makes me think too, like the first time I saw hydroponics was at Epcot Center in Walt Disney World. And so that was a long time ago, But like now that's that's a classroom now. I mean, that's phenomenal to see that. What does that mean for the kids in terms of seeing the basil grow, or what's their experience like?
I think we all may have experienced the elementary classroom where we take the old milk carton and we put some soil in it. We grow a seed for Mother's Day, right? Yep. But I think this takes it to a whole new level when you think about the science behind hydroponics and the math behind it, and how to use natural things to grow our products, right? And then to eat it, to harvest it, to eat it. How this whole cycle of kind of farm to table in our schools.
Well, we just came full circle from gardening in your backyard as a child to farm to table in the schools that you're helping to lead. So we're going to wrap up the conversation again and just thank you so much for being with us here on the Dirt Podcast. Thank you for your leadership and the inspiration that you're providing us and all of our listeners.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for being with us here on the Dirt Podcast, and thanks again to Dr. Tracy Vitale and the Seneca Valley School District. And thanks for listening to The Dirt. We'll check you out on the next episode. I'm Grant Ervin with S&B USA, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.